Let's have a look at this question. How accurate is it to say that in the years 1918 to 1931, the Liberal Party was mainly responsible for the changing fortunes of the political parties? So let's just unpick this question. It's going up to 1931, so it's not going to cover anything really to do with the national government. So when it's talking about the changing fortunes of the political parties, you're going to have to analyse, well, how do they affect their own fortunes, the Liberal Party, but how do they also affect the fortunes of the Labour Party and also the Conservative Party? With this question, you're going to have to decide which second order concept it is. So we've got our 5 here. You've got a choice of significance, change in continuity, similarity and difference, causation and consequence. So pause the video and think which of these you think it might be. You should have come up with that this is a causation question. What is causing the changing fortunes of the 3 main parties in this date range? So they've given you the Liberal Party in the question. So that's what needs to go first. Was the Liberal Party responsible for its own downfall in this instance? So the Liberal Party, they caused their own downfall through a variety of reasons. The party was divided between Asquith and Lloyd George. Lloyd George was associated with a lot of scandals, particularly the Cash for Honour scandal, because he was trying to raise funds, because the party was already divided in the coup poll election. The party, either you had to stand as one of the Liberals independently, or you had to stand as one of the coalition Liberals, because the Liberals were in coalition with the Conservative Party in 1918. But also the Liberals, there is an argument put forward by George Dangerfield that the Liberals were already in a long-term decline. They were unable to resolve some of the key issues of the time, the suffragettes, Irish Home Rule. They'd been forced to go against a lot of their core principles during the First World War, an example being conscription, which necessitated massive intervention by the state, but that went against what the Liberals believed in, because they wanted a small state and less interference in people's lives. They also caused their own downfall by choosing in 1918 to stay in coalition with the Conservative Party. Lloyd George thought he was going to be able to create this new party between the Liberals and the Conservatives. So all these decisions that have been made, particularly by Lloyd George, they give space, they allow for the growth of both the Conservatives and the Labour Party as voters start switching their support in reflection of some of the issues that the Liberal Party is facing in the immediate and post-war era. But you've got to decide what you're going to compare it against. So what I thought I would compare it against, well, what also caused the changing fortunes of the political parties? Well, you can't really do this question without talking about the importance of the Representation of the People Act. So how did that lead to changing fortunes? Well, it's significant, but it's only significant to a certain extent, particularly up until 1928. The Conservatives benefited from this piece of legislation because they restricted the vote to women who were over the age of 30 who owned property. So the chances are they were more likely to vote for the Conservative Party. Labour also benefited from this because they had been the only party to support women getting the vote pre-1918, and they were very active in setting up women's sections and trying to capture these new voters in 1918. But significantly, 1918, the electorate is now made up of 80% is now working class, and Labour were very explicit about how they were going to support and promote the interests of the working class because they had emerged out of the trade union movement. Once the Liberal Party starts to go into this decline, then the first past the post voting system has an impact because it does tend to lend to a two-party system. So the Liberal Party gets squeezed out as the Labour Party and the Conservative Party start to exploit the situation. My third point that I would compare it against is the leadership of Stanley Baldwin, because I think he's really important and influential in the changing fortunes of all of the parties. Firstly, he speeds up the downfall of the Liberals. He leads this breakaway in 1922, and he's also a very good communicator. He's the first leader of a Conservative or any party to use radio to good effect to communicate with the electorate. He also is seen as a really safe pair of hands. He's not eccentric, he's very mainstream, and he allows Ramsay MacDonald, to become Prime Minister in 1931. He encourages him to stay as Prime Minister, and that allows the Labour Party and MacDonald specifically to take the burden of blame for the economic problems that they're facing in the Depression from 1929 onwards. So here we've got an introduction to this question. Just note it's not particularly long, but it does tick all the boxes of what we need to see in a good introduction. So it could be argued that the Representation of the People Act was mainly responsible, so we've got some judgment there, for the changing fortunes of political parties from 1918 to 1931, as it changed the makeup of the electorate. So it's talking about impact. It could also be argued that the Labour Party was most responsible. So here we've got our second factor they're going to be comparing it against. As it grew, support grew massively. However, it is most convincing to argue that the Liberal Party was mainly responsible, as the decisions of its leaders ultimately led to its downfall. So we've got a very strong judgment. So I know I've got my judgment, and I know what the three key paragraphs are going to be about. So finally, there we go, there they are. So finally, to make sure that you're writing an analytical essay and you're not writing a descriptive or narrative essay, you need to really work on opening sentences, strong opening sentences to each paragraph. They have to have an argument. It shouldn't be a statement, or it shouldn't be a narrative description of events. It's got to be an argument setting out your case. And here we've got a good example. Some may argue that the Representation of the People Act was mainly responsible for the changing fortune of the political parties because it inflated Labour support while deflating Liberal support. So they're giving a really clear indication this is what is going to be the focus and the main argument they're going to be exploring in this paragraph, and the rest of the paragraph is going to be talking about exploring those ideas and supporting it with key evidence.